Herb. Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything. Herb.
Hello, welcome to the Eugene Cannabis TV show. You made the trip, and I hope to get some good information out to you. We have items from within the state as well as all over the nation regarding cannabis and cannabis law reform. The first thing I want to talk about is Sensible Oregon. I ran into Madeline Martinez with the Oregon Normal chapter, and they're working on the Sensible Oregon initiative. This is an initiative that, as they're saying, that the time has come to remove all existing civil and criminal penalties for adults 21 and over who cultivate, possess, transport, exchange, or use marijuana. Marijuana laws are no longer physically sustainable, making this a pivotal time. They are saying that we plan to do this in ways that protect our children and without impacting existing laws proscribing dangerous activities while under the influence of marijuana. The state will regulate access through the legislative process. So this is similar to the Sensible Seattle, up that area several years ago, and it was quite successful, and it worked out well for them. It's not quite as radical as decriminalization, but it has some of the same results, hopefully. So it's just another attempt. We have the OCTA 2012 initiative now that people are gathering signatures on, which legalizes for 21 and above. There's OMPIs coming out. They're working on that one. And then we've got the Sensible Oregon. So at some point, we should have 3 initiatives out gathering signatures. The bad news is we're running out of time because the summer is essentially over now for this year, and they have to get them turned in the beginning of July next year. So, like I said, we've effectively lost summer signature gathering time now, and that's the prime time in this state. So it remains to be seen what happens there. Story I wanted to revisit on about Florida. A couple times we've talked about it in the past, and some more news on that. Florida passed a law requiring applicants to take drug tests to get benefits. And so the first story is saying few Florida welfare applicants failed drug tests so far. During his election campaign last year, Florida Governor Rick Scott, Republican, surprise, campaigned on, among other things, cutting government spending by reducing the welfare rolls through drug testing. Welfare recipients were more likely than average citizens to be drug users, he claimed. Scott unsuccessfully pushed his welfare drug testing bill through the legislature, and the program went into effect July 1st. But preliminary results undercut his claims of high drug use rates among people seeking welfare benefits, and they suggest that the vaulted savings to taxpayers will not be very significant. According to the Tampa Tribune, the State Department of Children and Families is reporting some preliminary numbers. So far, at least 1,000 applicants have undergone drug testing, and only 2% have failed their drug tests. Another 2% have, for reasons unknown, failed to complete the application process. These numbers suggest that not only are Florida welfare recipients not a bunch of lazy junkies getting high on the backs of taxpayers, but that they actually use drugs at a significantly lower rate than the population as a whole. The editorial note that was added here said, drug testing proponents might argue that the program is causing applicants to drop using drugs in order to qualify for benefits. But that idea squares neither with the addict characterization commonly made about welfare recipients, nor the weeks that marijuana remains detectable in the bloodstream after its last use. According to the 2009 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 8.7% of the population nationally over 12 used an illicit drug in the previous month. The rate was 6.3% for those ages 26 and up. The 2006 National Survey disaggregated usage rates by state and found a figure of 7.69% of people 12 and under using within the past month in Florida. The ACLU of Florida is studying a lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of the warrantless, suspicionless, mandatory drug test, told the Tampa Tribune, and the Florida law is based on stereotypes of poor people. And that brings us into the next story. A veteran and the ACLU challenge Florida drug test law. Florida's new law requiring applicants for the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program to take and pass a drug test in order to receive benefits is being challenged by the ACLU. The group filed a class action lawsuit in federal district court in Orlando. Tuesday, arguing the new law was unconstitutional and seeking a temporary injunction to block its implementation. Under the law, which passed Florida's House and Senate in April and May, respectively, applicants can be denied public assistance for a year if they fail the drug test, and denied for 3 years if they fail a second drug test. Persons who complete drug treatment will regain eligibility, and the children of people denied benefits can receive funds through a designated trustee. It's our view that not only is this program unconstitutional and illegal, but it is a public policy that rests on ugly stereotypes, said ACLU Executive Director Howard Simon at a Wednesday morning press conference. So that's interesting to see how that turns out in Florida as they trying to save money by cutting benefits to the people that need it just because they might be a drug user. So anyway, that's one of those things where you just keep saying, I'm not making this up, folks. But then we have some positive points too. It's out of Arkansas. Arkansas medical marijuana push sparks reaction. An Arkansas group is already gathering signatures to place a medical marijuana initiative on the November 2012 ballot. And now the effort is sparking a critical reaction from a local Christian conservative traditional family values organization. But medical marijuana backers say they have God on their side too. Arkansans for Compassionate Care won approval in April to circulate petitions for the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Act. It needs to gather 62,507 valid voter signatures by next July to appear on the November 2012 ballot. The group said it plans to gather double the required number to provide a large cushion in case large numbers of signatures are found to be invalid. The initiative would allow patients with serious illnesses like cancer, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, and PTSD, whose doctors recommended medical marijuana, to possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana. Patients would obtain marijuana from one of up to 30 state-regulated dispensaries, or if they don't live near a dispensary, they or a designated caregiver could grow their own. Patients more than 5 miles from a dispensary could grow up to 6 plants. I've talked to dozens and dozens of patients across the state, the group's Ryan Denham told Fox 16 News Monday night. People that suffer from debilitating medical conditions, things like multiple sclerosis, cancer, hepatitis C, and the patients are really kind of just fed up with the fact that they just have to break the law to get medicine their doctor recommends. There are no southern states that have legalized medical marijuana, so I think it would send definitely an important message nationally to the Congress that our system is broken and patients need access to medical marijuana. And just to be clear, we're not trying to decriminalize marijuana or to provide it recreationally. This is only for people that are sick or have terminally ill conditions. So that's great news out of Arkansas, and like I said, it'll be the first state in the South to get it if it passes, so it remains to be seen. And 2012 is going to be one heck of an interesting election year everywhere. There's a lot of people working on ballots to be on that election cycle, so we can always hope. Things are looking good there. There's a film out that I was reading about here, and I haven't seen it myself, but I hope sure like to see it. Exile Nation is the name of it. It says challenges drug policies, and the filmmaker decries prison as a solution. The Spokane premiere of the documentary film Exile Nation talks about starts in playing up in Spokane. Charles Shaw considered himself a former POW of the drug war, a felon-turned-filmmaker who wants to expose the injustice of the mass incarceration of drug offenders, which he calls a 40-year, $1 trillion social catastrophe. Shaw will be in Spokane on Friday for the local premiere of his documentary. It's called the Exile Nation Project, an oral history of the war on drugs and American criminal justice system. The film, a collection of testimonials from offenders, family members, and experts on the U.S. criminal justice system, is backed by statistics that can be found on Shaw's website, exilenation.org. With 2.5 million people in American prisons, it says the U.S. has more people incarcerated than China, which has 5 times the population. Shaw cites a 2010 investigation by The Economist magazine that concluded, "Never in a civilized world have so many been locked up for so little." That's pretty well put. Washington State has 18,290 people in confinement, 9.3% for drug crimes. Another 18,842 are on active supervision, nearly 28% convicted of drug crimes. Shaw advocates an end to the criminalization of victimless vice crimes. For possession and use of substance, there's no reason on earth why people should be churned through the criminal justice system, he said in an interview. The drug war, Shaw contends, was begun as a way to disrupt political movements and control immigrant populations, not to stamp out drugs. "We use more chemicals than any society on the planet," Shaw said. "It's just that we've gotten to the point to where the vast majority of them are legal and pharmaceutical, and they also happen to be the biggest drugs of abuse and the most dangerous drugs of abuse." The screening of Exile Nation is sponsored by the November Coalition, the Colville-based nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the war on drugs and promoting the rights of prisoners arrested on drug charges. Yeah, November Coalition, I mentioned that on the show before, excellent organization, and they bring up their displays at events consists of a booth that looks like a jail with images of families and then their story, and it's very touching to see the waste going on and the families being disrupted over such a small item. So anyway, that's Exile Nation, and keep your ears open for it and see if it comes around you, or might Google it and see if you can get it in your area. And this kind of ties into that titled, "Prosecutors, Not Police, Have Driven Police Population Growth." The United States prison population exploded over the past 40 years. But why? Have police been making more arrests? Have prosecutions charging more people with crimes? Have judges been issuing longer sentences? Have parole boards been stricter? All of the above? Since many accounts of mass incarceration collapsed the criminal justice system into a single monolith, it had to be hard to know exactly what part of the system has driven the growth in the prison population. A new empirical study of the Fordham law professor John Pfaff aims to provide a more granular explanation of the cause of mass incarceration. Pfaff concludes the population has the number of felony cases filings per arrest. In other words, police haven't been arresting more people. Rather, prosecutors have become more likely to charge those arrested with crimes. Unlike the volume of arrests, that the felony case finding tracks the number of admissions quite closely. In the 26 states that provide reliable felony filing data to the National Center on State Courts, between 1987 and 2006, filings grew by 129%, while admissions grew by an almost identical 132%. The decision to file charges thus appears to be the heart of the prison growth. So, again, it's the prosecutors that are funding the growth of the prisons, filling our prisons, and we are now, I believe I heard the figure that we're the leading incarcerators of the world, and that's a dubious title to have, say the least.
Hi. The cannabis you breathe in is nature, as is the breathing process itself. You reconnect with nature in the most intimate and powerful way by becoming aware of your breathing and learning to hold your attention there. This is a healing and deeply empowering thing to do. It brings about a shift in consciousness from the conceptual world of thought to the inner realm of unconditioned consciousness. The shift from thinking to awareness is the most significant thing that can happen to you. God bless cannabis and peace to all. I'm Cannabis Joe Canfield. Thank you for listening.
And then Oklahoma, there was a guy by the name of Foster, I've forgotten his first, Randy Foster, I think it was, years ago that was caught growing plants for his medicinal purposes and was sentenced to life. He has since been remanded, he's gotten out, but anyway, he actually at one point had a life sentence over pot. So it says the Oklahoma bill would end life without parole drug sentences. Despite some recent sentencing reforms, Oklahoma still has some of the harshest drug laws in the country, including life without parole for some drug offenses. One Oklahoma legislature says it is time for life without parole for nonviolent drug offenses to go. State Senator Constance Johnson, Democrat, Oklahoma City, last Wednesday introduced Senate Bill 986, which would end life sentences without parole for nonviolent drug offenses and require the state pardon and parole board to review all existing life without parole sentences for these offenses. The measure also addresses punishment enhancements for felony offenses. Numerous studies have shown that these sentences do not reduce drug use, but rather result in lengthy prison terms and contribute to overcrowding and increased costs, Johnson said, citing research from the Sentencing Project, a Washington, D.C.-based research and advocacy group. We must develop more reasonable and cost-effective policies to address drug crimes rather than locking up offenders for life, something that financially hurts the state as well as the families of those individuals. Although Johnson had scheduled a press conference Wednesday to announce the introduction of the bill, the announcement was delayed for a day because she wanted to attend a pardon and parole board meeting for one of the victims of the life without parole law, 61-year-old Larry Yarborough, who is 17 years into his life sentence for possession of an ounce of cocaine and 3 marijuana cigarettes after having previous felony convictions, including distribution of marijuana and distribution of LSD in the 80s. Yarborough, a model prisoner whose case has garnered national media attention, had been recommended for a commutation to 20 years by the parole board in 2002, but that recommendation was vetoed by then Governor Frank Keating, again, Republican, surprise. He had better luck Wednesday with the board commuting his sentence to 42 years, meaning he'll be eligible for release sometime next year if Governor Mary Fallin, Republican, agrees. At the parole board meeting were more than 24 supporters, including members of the Yarborough's family, his attorney, Senator Johnson, and 2 of the jurors in that case that got him sentenced to life. That juror, Dennis Will of Hennessy, sent a letter to the board last week urging the board to release Yarborough. In the letter, he said he did not vote for a life sentence for Yarborough and believes he was set up and railroaded by the Kingfisher County judicial system. Yarborough, who is imprisoned at the Daves Correctional Facility in Holdenville, testified via electronic link. He told the board he had undergone numerous drug treatment programs and acted as a mentor for newly arriving prisoners sentenced to life without parole for nonviolent drug offenses. There are currently 48 drug lifers in the Oklahoma prison system. This is a victory, Yarborough's attorney, Deborah Hampton, told the Associated Press after the board continued his sentencing. We have murderers, rapists, and child molesters being paroled, but here is a husband, father, grandfather, business owner, and community servant who could spend half of his life in prison, costing the state millions of dollars, said Johnson. We have people serving less time for greater amounts of drugs than what Mr. Yarborough was convicted of, an ounce of cocaine and 3 marijuana cigarettes. Surely 17 years is long enough punishment for his crime. In the name of justice and common sense, I urge Governor Fallin to accept the board's recommendations, she added. So let's hope that they can see the light. I don't know. It's all, I don't know. Some of these states, I don't get it. But and then we a little closer to home, and here's another one that's another head scratcher. Washington State judge says he won't trust any doctor's word on medical marijuana. The owners of a Tacoma medical marijuana dispensary fighting to get back pot seized during a police investigation first must prove they are legally authorized to possess medical cannabis. If they can't, their case is dead on arrival. But what constitutes sufficient proof? The answer to that question, which is being pondered by Pierce County Superior Court Judge John Hickam, might have lasting repercussions as Washington continues to try to make sense of the evolving medical marijuana landscape. It's a challenging issue, Hickman said Wednesday, adding that the case could potentially be creating new law or at least an argument for review by another court. Guy Casey and Michael Schaaf believe the medical authorizations signed by their doctors constitute enough proof to give them legal standing to continue their fight. A doctor signing such an authorization attests that the patient has a qualifying medical condition, cancer, HIV, and intractable pain among them under state law, and that the use of marijuana might help provide relief for that condition that most traditional medications don't. Deputy Prosecutor John Sheeran doesn't think the form is enough. He wants Casey and Schaaf to produce medical records and, if need be, sworn testimony from their doctor to prove they have a condition that qualifies them to possess medical cannabis. They can't just throw a piece of paper down and say it's valid documentation, and that makes them a qualifying patient, he argued to Hickman. They've got to prove he is a qualifying patient. Attorney Aaron Pelly, who represents Casey, said it's a doctor's job to determine who qualifies for medical marijuana, not a judge. He also argued that requiring a doctor to divulge a patient's medical history violates privacy laws. Attorney Kent Underwood, who represents Schaaf, pointed out that an appellate decision supports his client's position. As long as the doctor has evaluated the condition and has advised the patient of the statutory provisions, the authorization is valid. That constitutes valid documentation, and the qualifying condition itself does not need to be listed, Underwood said. No medical records or doctor testimony is necessary. Hickman told the parties he hadn't made up his mind on the case, but he hinted he might be leaning towards Sheeran's position. We have doctors advertising in the Little Nickel want ads for medical exams for $25 off, the judge said. That caused me concern. For me, just to accept blindly a document from a physician or healthcare provider that I know nothing about, how do I know himself is qualified? Casey and Schaaf said, who are friends as well as business partners, were arrested in May 2010 after agents with the West Coast Sound Narcotics Enforcement Team raided the Club 420 cooperative on Oregon Avenue and Casey's home. Prosecutors charged them in with several drug crimes. The detectives seized 85 marijuana plants and 11 pounds of harvested pot. Much of the case against the men was based on the testimony of a confidential informant, but prosecutors later dismissed the charges when the man's credibility was called into question. In March, Casey made a motion for the return of the marijuana and other property seized during the raids. Pelly and Underwood say their clients are legitimate medical marijuana patients and providers and deserve to get their pot back. Casey said outside court Wednesday he feels he's the victim of a double standard. He wouldn't want to approve a medical condition if he had a prescription for painkillers. Hickey is to issue a ruling on the proof question September 2nd. So anyway, another gray area regarding medical marijuana. It just keeps getting more and more complicated. So, and then the tragic story is out of Minnesota. Trapped trooper kills Minnesota woman fleeing a drug bust. A Minnesota woman was shot and killed by a state trooper Saturday as she dragged him with her vehicle while attempting to flee a traffic stop that would have resulted in a drug bust. The woman, Deborah Dory, 48, becomes the 34th person to be killed in domestic drug law enforcement operations so far this year. According to State Patrol, the incident began as a routine traffic stop on I-94 Saturday afternoon when the unnamed trooper pulled Dory over for an equipment violation. The trooper noticed a large amount of a white crystalline substance during their interaction and was investigating when Dory jumped back into her vehicle and tried to flee. The trooper's arm got tangled in the steering wheel as she drove off, and she dragged the trooper approximately 30 yards before he was able to unholster his weapon and shoot her. The trooper received minor injuries. The white substance was later confirmed to be a very substantial amount of narcotics. Dory had no criminal record, but her husband, 53, has numerous convictions, including several for possession of meth and marijuana. The unnamed trooper has been put on paid leave pending investigation of the incident. So anyway, it's unfortunate, another drug war death. So it goes on. So anyway, I appreciate stopping by and checking out our show. We'll hope you learned something. And you got your host, DanK. And I've got a crew down here at the Eugene Cannabis TV show, filmed at Community 29 TV Studios behind Sheldon High School every Monday night. So anytime, 4 o'clock Monday, come on by and say hi. Until next time, goodbye.
To act on your feelings feels like the most natural thing in the world. Compassion, love, indignation, longing for justice, anger, a noble sequence of feelings. But I know from experience that something happens to anger when it gets down inside you and stagnates. Anger turns into rage, useless rage, much less manageable than anger. Roughly, anger has an address, rage is broadcast. Anger wants change, while rage, above all, demands punishment. Rage has its disguises and is wild and implacable because it erupts from within. Often, not always, it is some vast, unfathomable guilt. For me, suffering of others implies guilt. What I am about to say may not apply to you, but my hunch says that it applies to people you know. You feel that as long as you do not act, you permit a wrong and become one of its co-authors. So you see, it's not that I fail to understand passion. To be sure, the rapture of passion is a political aphrodisiac. Precisely because I do know the feeling that I caution. Keep rage under control and be patient. Safe and legal access to medical cannabis will happen because a powerful idea communicates some of its power to those who resist it. Thank you, and I'm Cannabis Joe Canfield. Thank you.